year, we are very privileged to invite Mr. Muhammad Prasad Hanif to present to us on leading in a VUCA world. So some background of our speaker today. Mr. Muhammad Prasad Hanif is an author, a keynote speaker, a trainer, and a coach who specializes in leadership and business transformation. He is honored to be recognized as one of 100 most inspirational LinkedIn icons in Malaysia. He is also a certified master neuro-linguistic programming practitioner and professional business coach. In fact, he is a keynote speaker in so many areas of leadership, integrity, and technology. He has coached over 500 entrepreneurs across his career. As of now, he is serving as the Secretary General of the Council of the Association of Development Finance Institution Malaysia. He is also the CEO of Darul Haq Global Ventures Sendirian Berhad. During his free time, he loves to swim, he loves to cook, and also lead a very active lifestyle, which includes weightlifting. So without further delay, let us welcome our speaker for today, Mr. Muhammad Prasad Hanif.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I think they overstated a lot of things. How is everyone doing? Great. I really love the vibe, the excitement, the entire, the atmosphere since I came this morning at 9 o'clock. I can see the camaraderie. I can see that everybody missed seeing each other, isn't it? Yeah, everybody's so excited. Ladies and gentlemen, a few weeks ago, right, it was Hari Raya time, right? And I was back in my wife's village, which is in Kelantan. Anybody here from Kelantan? No? Oh no. Anyway, right? So I was back in Kelantan to celebrate the Hari Raya festivities. And while I was in Kelantan, I received a call. I had to attend a business meeting in Kuala Lumpur, right? So what I did was essentially, business is business. Festivities is festivities. I must attend the business meeting. So what I did was essentially go ahead and went ahead and booked my flight ticket to go back to Kuala Lumpur, right? So on the third day of Hari Raya, I went to the airport. The airport was fantastic. It was full of people, right? And I took Air Asia, which was, of course, 5 times the normal price, right? During that time. So I arrived at the airport. Everybody was so happy. It was festivities. People were traveling all over the place. And it was entirely a joyous experience at the airport. I went in, I checked in my luggage, I went into the boarding area where we wait for the flight. And miraculously, on that day, my flight was on time, right? So that happens once in a while, but it did happen on that day, right? It was on time. I was very happy. So the time came, the boarding time came, and I went in. We boarded the flights. Everybody was settling down. It was fantastic. The flight was quite full, so everybody took their seats. The luggages went on the overhead compartment, right? Everything was settled down. I was quite happy. Everybody was just in a joyous mood. And as everybody sat down and we were getting ready, right, I realized one thing. I was in a 3-seater. I had the window seat. And then there was a passenger on the aisle seat, and there was no passenger right beside me. Ladies and gentlemen, do you know that feeling when you're in an Air Asia flight and there's no passenger on the other side? Do you have that feeling? The seat is essentially created for half a human being. Now you've got a full human being space right there, isn't it? Right? You know that feeling. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what happened after that? Right? So I was sitting there, I was really enjoying this feeling. It's going to be a wonderful flight. I got leg room now, I got elbow room, I got the entire room for myself, right? So I was feeling there, nothing can go wrong. And at that point, rushed through that door was a man sweating and panting. Half of his shirt was essentially drenched with sweat. Ladies and gentlemen, I think he was running half the airport, or perhaps the entire length of the airport. And at that time, I'm looking at him, right? Let that guy not sit beside me. That was the first thing that came into my mind. Don't tell me. Be honest. Every one of you have had that thought, right? So the first thing that came to my thought was, let that guy not sit beside me, right? And he's like apologizing to the stewardess, right? And he started to look for his seat. And again, I'm here sitting in my window seat. I'm telling myself, that guy is sweating, right? God, and I'm essentially praying now, let that guy not sit beside me, right? Then I see him walking down, and at this point, I'm trying very hard to avoid eye contact. I don't want this anymore, right? The stress is unbearable, right? He's sweating. And then the thought comes to me like, what if he starts smelling? Oh no, right? And the stress level just peaks, right? And at that point, I'm still trying to not maintain eye contact, right? So that if you maintain eye contact, he might actually ask, if this seat free? And I would have to say yes, right? So I'm really trying very hard not to maintain eye contact, right? So he's still looking for his seat. And then he comes to my row. He stands at my row. And here I am, really trying. You know when people come to your row and you're looking at them and you're trying to accommodate, right? That's not happening. I'm really trying to avoid eye contact. I'm looking out the window now, right? So, and that guy looks to the person at the aisle seat, and he asks, and he says to the person at the aisle seat, that's my seat. And the passenger at the aisle seat just gets up and that, at that point, right? At that point, my feeling just sunk. Right? I'm like, here we go again. Right? Ladies and gentlemen, as he sat down, he turns to me with a beaming smile, with a happy face. He says, Selamat Hari Raya. Right? And that essentially absolutely changed my mood, doesn't it? Right? Ladies and gentlemen, what happened between the point that person entered the aeroplane until the time where he sat down was things that were not within my control, was it? It is things that I convinced myself what are the things that were going to happen. Who induced that stress? Who induced that stress? We did, with our thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, the world is changing faster than ever before. The world is changing in ways that we have never seen before, ladies and gentlemen. COVID-19 happened the last 3 years, correct? We had lockdowns. Who's here above 60 years old? Have you ever faced a lockdown in your entire life? Never. Anybody? My father, 76 years old. He faced his first lockdown, right? Never before. Meaning that in almost 100 years, we've never faced lockdowns. We did it for the first time. And then there were the not so lockdowns. And then there were kind of lockdowns, but they're not really lockdowns. You had that, right? You experienced that as well, right? But ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 didn't only show us the impact of a pandemic on our healthcare system, but it also showed us its impact and the fragility of our social system in its entirety. During the COVID-19, it showed us that it can push 263 million people into poverty. But at the same time, it was able to create 573 new billionaires. At the same time, during the lockdown itself, the first few months of COVID-19. Then we had what? After COVID-19, we had the worker shortages. I was talking to Mr. Chandran earlier, talking about how worker shortages was happening, businesses were going down, right? And that caused a lot of stress on the supply and demand. We were depending on foreign workers to work, right? And even when the lockdown ended, most of the restaurants couldn't operate. Why? We were dependent on the foreign workers, and we couldn't get the foreign workers, and there were worker shortages, and therefore, businesses were stressed out as well. We saw that. Then we saw employee fear. We saw in Malaysia alone, statistics say there was about 200,000 entrepreneurs who closed shop. Essentially closed down the business, right? And what happens when entrepreneurs close business? Do you know what happens? Anybody want to guess? People lose their jobs. Families lose their income. And this fear was real, ladies and gentlemen, and this fear was essentially across all employee sectors, right? This happened as well in the last 3 years. Then we had climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, during the lockdown, do you remember when there were pictures of a very blue and clean Klang River? Do you see that? I don't know if did everyone see that? Right? And we had the healthiest air pollution index ever. Agreed? It showed us that as well, the COVID-19 during the lockdown, right? But climate change was real as well. After that, we had earthquakes, we had typhoons, we had unprecedented floods, right? Climate change also happened and impacted our businesses. Then came social unrest. Ukraine, I was talking to a few of you earlier, Ukraine and Russia war impacted every one of us, right? It's impacting all the way down to Malaysia as well. Then we had the social unrest in Sri Lanka. The entire ecosystem essentially collapsed. Social unrest around the world. Then we had political instability. We've had 3 prime ministers in 3 years. Talk about instability, right? 3 prime ministers in 3 years. That's also impacting us to a certain extent. Ladies and gentlemen, it feels, if you're operating in this environment, to a certain extent, it will feel like it's a never-ending earthquake. Something's always happening. There's some disruption coming along. There's some instability coming along. There's some unrest coming along. It always feels like that. And today, ladies and gentlemen, this constant unknown creates anxiety and fear. And that's what essentially we as business owners usually feel as well, because of the anxiety and fear of the unknown, unpredictability environment. Ladies and gentlemen, we actually have a name for this environment. We call it the VUCA environment. VUCA essentially is an acronym that stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. I think every one of us can identify to every one of those words, right? Now, let me just briefly explain. This is not going to be a classroom education, but we need to go through each of those words so that we understand the overall meaning. Volatile essentially refers to the rate of things at which things change, rate of change of things in the environment today. Let me just give you an example. Who here has used the Nokia 6600 or any brand of Nokia before? Half the room, right? What did that handphone do? It can call, it can message, it can do what else? Yeah, play snakes, right? But who here uses a smartphone? Can I see hands? Everybody here uses smartphone, right? What can your smartphone do? Everything. Whatever you want. You want to write an email? Go ahead. Smartphone is there, right? You want to play games? Go ahead. Smartphone is there. Instantaneous communication? You can do that. All this happened in how many years? We can still remember the day we used Nokia, right? It's not even 2 generations, not even 1 generation. It was just within the last 1.5 decades. That's volatility. The rate of things, rate of change of things in this environment. The second one is uncertainty. Uncertainty essentially refers to the lack of predictability and information. Now, there is a little bit of argument there. I think there's a lot of information. There's a lot of information that is at your fingertips. The problem is sifting and filtering through that information. That's a lot more problematic. And the ability to predict from that noise is a lot more challenging. And I'll tell you how to go through this in a while. Right? The third word is complexity. Complexity essentially refers to the interconnected systems with unclear cause and effect. We're all connected to a certain extent, right? Now, I was talking to, it was wonderful actually today. I'm so excited because I actually had an opportunity to talk to Mr. Andrew. He's not here. He's actually hosting a competition that's happening in South Africa while he's sitting here. That's how interconnected we are. Amazing, isn't it? He wants to see how Toastmasters here in Malaysia do things, but at the same time, he has some things to do in South Africa, and he can do it. Amazing how we're interconnected, right? And then the last word is ambiguity, and this is a very key word that we need to understand as well. Ambiguity essentially refers to the difficulty in judging reality in a complex and volatile environment. Difficulty in judging reality. Ladies and gentlemen, how many of you here has TikTok installed in your cell phone? Anybody does? Ah, you do. Nobody wants to admit it, or is it something kind of... Who has TikTok? I mean, you don't have to have an account and have content on it, but you do have the app. Oh, there you go. Ponsapura has one, right? Now, let's take algorithm of TikTok itself. You watch TikTok, and you're a fitness person, right? You're a fitness person, you go to gym. Just like me, I have TikTok installed in my cell phone, right? So, I like fitness, I like gym, I like weightlifting, right? So, when I watch TikTok, right? The videos that I tend to like and make favorites are based on what? Fitness, right? So I love something that comes from, Noel, right? Some fitness experts, I just like them, right? I love them, and then I put them in my favorites here. That's normal, right? But after a while, what does TikTok does? What happens? Most of my feed is going to be what? Fitness and weightlifting, isn't it? It's going to bombard me with that information. And what happens after that? After a while, I began to realize that, hey, I'm not alone. Everybody is in weightlifting and fitness. My reality has changed, hasn't it? Not everybody is in weightlifting and fitness, right? I'm thinking everybody's in weightlifting and fitness. Similarly, right, is anybody here following Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case? Ah, I see, there's a few of you, right? Right. Now, if you start liking Johnny Depp's side of the story, what happens to your feed? It's always pro Johnny Depp, isn't it? And after how many weeks already? It's already been 3 weeks, 4 weeks of this trial, right? 3 to 4 weeks of this trial. Every day you're seeing Johnny Depp as being the victim. What happens? You convince yourself Johnny Depp is... What is happening? You convince yourself that Johnny Depp is innocent. That's the second example that I can give you. This is where you start to see ambiguity, meaning that you're unable to judge between what is reality, right? So this is how we are programmed. Ladies and gentlemen, VUCA is not new, really. VUCA has always been there since mankind started making stuff. It's always been there. The difference is, today in this modern world, it's magnified. Anybody here had the opportunity to have a black and white television? Anybody? Oh, yeah, some of you have actually seen the black and white television, right? What year was it, sir? 1960s, right? 1960s. He had a black and white. The television was invented in 1920s. How long did it take to have color? Late 1960s, early 70s, right? Took about 40 years to get color. And then every one of us here, not every one of us, some of you are young, you're like 18 perhaps, right? There you go. Now, some of us have had the opportunity to see the huge CRT televisions, right? The one that's big, boxy type, right? We had all that opportunity. How long did it take to become flat screen? Or flat, essentially? It took another 40 years. That's VUCA, essentially. That's volatile, there's uncertainty, there's complexity. That's VUCA, it's changing, right? But the rate of change was very slow. VUCA was there. It just took a longer time. So we were able to predict and adapt to it, ladies and gentlemen. But today, from the Nokia to the smartphone that we have today, it was almost instantaneous. And that's the challenge we're facing today. And the reasons why this is happening in this environment is for three reasons. Number one is globalization. And we've been talking about globalization for the last 20 years. I was in the United States and we were talking about globalization in our microeconomic classes. But it has been never more true today, right? I think Mr. Kelly went to Maldives. I spoke to him earlier, right? How did the communication happen? All these things, communications before he went to Maldives has already occurred, right? And then he stepped on the Maldives arena, correct? There were connections happening before he went to Maldives. Globalization is the first one. The second thing that magnified the environment today is instantaneous communication. I'll talk about more about this instantaneous communication a little bit later. But last week I was in a hotel. I was doing a certification course and whatnot, right? And at night, 7 p.m., I was WhatsApping, right? Messaging a friend of mine in Canada, Vancouver, right? And we managed, within that 1 hour, we were talking, messaging on WhatsApp. We essentially agreed on the tentative, on the agenda, on the date for our study visit to Canada. While, where? At the hotel room. And she was in Canada. We managed to arrange all that. Instantaneous communication is powerful. And the third thing that's magnifying this VUCA world is innovation ecosystem. Everybody here has heard the word disruption, correct? Everybody. And what's the reason? Why have you heard of that word? That's the question. Why have you heard of that word? Because everywhere you go, there's an ecosystem, whether at the micro level, at the organization itself, or at the macro level, in terms of the country itself, there are places where there are ecosystems for you to build and innovate. Agreed? Agreed. So there are innovation ecosystems across society. There are innovation ecosystems across countries as well. It's built like that, right? And that's why there's a lot of disruptive technologies are able to flourish and they become commercialized within such a short period of time. If the ecosystem was not there, if someone invented the smartphone in the 1920s, the ecosystem wasn't there. Nobody would have supported it, right? But because the ecosystem, innovation ecosystem is here, and when people invented the smartphone, when people invented the app for Grab, right, it absolutely disrupted the way we look at things and economy. Ladies and gentlemen, what does all this mean? This means that the tools that we are trained with, myself included, because I went to the universities in the late 1990s, right? Early 2000s, I was in the university. And the systems and the management tools that we learned was designed for what period? For the 20th century. The tools that we learned in order for us to manage change, in order for us to manage innovation, was based on the environment of the 20th century. 21st century is nothing like that anymore. And what that essentially means is that the 20th century tools is no more capable of helping us to navigate through this environment. It's quite rigid, it's quite fragile, and it's very unresponsive. Now, I'll explain about this a little bit later. But that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that we need to adjust our thinking. Now, before I go a little bit further into this, last year, I had an opportunity to have coffee with a friend of mine. His name is Alex. And Alex is the type of guy who likes to have coffee in Starbucks and Starbucks alone. Every one of us has a friend like that, right? No, mama, man, only Starbucks, right? And then all of us will have one friend like that, right? No, you want to have a discussion, let's go to either Starbucks or the high-end Bangsa shopping center, right? You have that one friend, right? And you kind of know that already, right? So no point of you suggesting let's go have nasi kandar or let's go have, this mama stall food. No, Starbucks, right? So I had this opportunity to have a coffee session with him. That's good. This guy is a really good friend. I traveled around the world with him. So anyway, I think it was last year, and it was during the period where the Prime Minister of that time, Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, resigned, right? So I had coffee with him during that time. So I and Alex were sitting right opposite each other, and I had my hot chocolate, and he had his coffee, right? And Alex leaned over and he said, Prasad, you're within the inner circle, you have these connections, right? I said, well, that's subjective. Depends on whose inner circle, right? So he said, anyway, I really want to know, who do you think is going to be the next Prime Minister? So he asked me, right? He's asking me. So I looked at him, I looked at Alex, I looked at him for a good 2 seconds, right? And then I said, bro, I have had the privilege of looking at the list. I looked at it once, I looked at it twice, and I also looked at the numbers. And believe me, man, after 3 times looking at the list, your name was not there. Do you know what that means? Essentially, well, he was quite irritated with that answer, but what that means is that regardless of what happens, it doesn't matter because that is not within our sphere of influence and control. There are about 222 people in this country who have the privilege to determine the next Prime Minister. There's absolutely nothing we can do, right? It's not within our sphere of influence or control. What I'm saying is that in this day and era, in this environment, we need to look at, instead of just sitting down and pondering on the earthquakes that's happening in VUCA environment, I would like to invite you to look at how you can lead your organization, your work culture much better and help to create a more psychologically and emotionally healthy and resilient organization. And I'd like to invite you on this journey with me today. Are you okay? Yes. You're okay? Fantastic. Now let's go ahead. Now the first thing in terms of leading an organization in this environment is accepting the social changes. Now, this is very critical, and I put it at number 1. And the reason is, ladies and gentlemen, because if we don't accept where we are, and if we don't accept that things are changing, at what stage will we be in? We will be in denial, right? And when we are in denial, we will be resisting any kind of changes and disruption. Now, the first thing that we need to accept in terms of the social changes is what? Baby boomers are going to leave the workforce in droves. Accept it? Can you accept that? Yes, definitely, right? I became the Secretary General of Association of Development Finance Institution. That's a huge mouthful, but essentially means that I'm the Secretary General that governs the entire government banks in Malaysia. And I became the Secretary General at the age of 41. I took over from the person before me who was 56 years old. That's the difference in terms of age disparity. Baby boomers are going to be leaving the workforce. So the ones that are in their late 30s, early 40s, they're the ones who are taking over leadership. And this has never happened in the 20th century. In the 20th century, leadership was usually allocated to what? To 50-year-olds, correct? You'll see CEOs in their 50s, right? You'll see generally, of course there are exceptions. In generally, you'll see CEOs in their 50s in the 20th century. But today you're seeing CEO of banks in their early 40s. You're seeing very young, dynamic CEOs in their late 30s. I can name you so many of them today, right? And this is the changes that's happening. Baby boomers are leaving. One of the main primary reasons is because they're unable to adapt to the current VUCA environment, and therefore these 40-year-olds are taking the stage, right? That's one of the reasons why you're seeing most of you must have actually thought about it, right? Some of the CEOs being appointed are like, why? They're 39 years old, they're like babies, right? No, they're not, right? They're able to adapt. Now, that's the first thing. The second thing is, of course, diversity will grow in every aspect and every area. This you have to understand. Diversity is going to be very key. So the older and the most seasoned ones that are unable to accept diversity, they're going to be quite left behind. The younger generation focus more on diversity. They want every race. They don't care much about race and religion, right? So this has to be out there as well. And we have to accept this. The more you're fixated on race and religion, you're going to be more left behind, because diversity is one of the key factors that's affecting VUCA in today. It's all about innovation, it's all about your thinking capability, it's all about your adapting capability. It's not as much about your skin color or your race or your religion or your creed. That's number 2. Number 3 is training and development is going to be more important than ever before, but not in the way that you're thinking. It's not about core competencies, it's not about technical knowledge. Core competencies and technical knowledge are essentially available already on the internet. You want to learn programming, there are websites ran by artificial intelligence to teach you everything from C++ to Java to Python. You can learn on your own. You want to learn and become a SEO expert? You got Google that gives you a free course on that. And you're already a Google expert, Google SEO expert. That's core competency in terms of technicality. But what's going to be more important in terms of training and development is leadership and soft skills. This is going to be more important because leaders will need to change the way that things are going to happen and how they're going to lead their teams in this VUCA. And I'll explain about that a little bit later as well. And the fourth thing that we need to accept is social media. I think everybody accepts social media, right? But what we usually don't talk about in terms of social media is the corrosiveness of social media and the polarization that it causes. This we have to be very cognizant, because if you're leading an organization, as much as you use social media for your sales and marketing, everybody here uses social media for your sales and marketing, right? But you also understand social media has another edge to it as well. It's a double-edged sword. it can be very corrosive, and it can be polarizing as well. Have you seen people who have an absolutely different personality online? Have you seen people like that? You've actually had people like that, right? Online, they're absolutely aggressive. I am right, the entire world is wrong. I don't care, right? And then when you actually meet them, they're kind of acceptable, agreeable, and they're kind of meek, right? It's very different, right? So social media can cause a lot of polarization as well. We as leaders have to take cognizance of that fact, because we have to manage that polarization as leaders. It's not just about social media and marketing, right? And it's not about the 1-star rating only. It's about managing that polarization that can occur. Now, let me give you an example, right? If you have your company's Facebook page, for example, and your ex-employee goes out, and then he starts bashing your Facebook page, your employees are reading it. It's going to affect how your employees are motivated, correct? That's corrosiveness. That's polarization. And you as a leader will have to manage that. That's the point that I'm trying to make. Okay? So the first part, in terms of leading through VUCA, is essentially accepting the social change. Now the second one is technology is your friend. Ladies and gentlemen, a friend of mine, he's a French, right? Right after high school, he left Canada and he went to Japan. And he was, like high school, he's 19 years old, right? 19-year-olds, you really don't have much goals, right? So he went to Japan, and he was thinking, yeah, I just want to see Japan. And I just want to see a little bit of anime, perhaps, right? I got to know him because I'm an anime fan as well. So he went to Japan, right? So he went to Japan so when he landed in Japan, he's like, yeah, I'm going to be here for about, a week or two, so I don't need to learn Japanese. That's what he told himself. He ended up staying in Japan for 6 years. He ended up staying in Japan for 6 years, right? Now let me ask you a question. Do you think he learned Japanese in that 6 years? No, he couldn't. He tried, but he couldn't. He couldn't learn. He tried very hard. He couldn't. He just could not get the language. He could not understand the language. He could not learn the language. And until today, this is what we call as anchoring yourself. He convinced himself when he landed that he did not need the language. And when you say you do not need the language, you lack what? You lack purpose. He convinced himself already. So even though he attended classes to learn Japanese, what happened? He couldn't learn it. He convinced himself, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, one of the key things for young leaders, especially those in the late 30s and early 40s, right? We convince ourselves, I'm too old for this. Have you ever talked to yourself like that? I'm too old for this technology. Let the younger ones figure it out. Have you ever told yourself that? Oh, there you go. Right? So some of us convince ourselves like that, and we end up what? Unable to learn that technology, isn't it? Right? Because we've already had that mental block subconsciously, right? So this is what the main message of this is for the young leaders. Convince yourself from now until the day you die, you're going to be learning new technologies. And technology is going to be your friend. Never have a mental block, right? Now, my bosses were baby boomers, right? I have always heard this statement. I'm too old for this, right? Let the young executive figure it out how to do this, right? They've convinced themselves. Now, we don't want to fall in that trap as well, because we, the younger generation today, 38, 39, 40, early 40s, right? We're trained by the baby boomers to become leaders, right? To a certain extent. Those are things that you need to learn to unlearn. Right? That's one key message. You need to learn to unlearn that. Right? That's number one. Number two is, of course, learn the technology as much as you can. Now, the third part, in terms of leading in this VUCA, is what what Mr. Srinivasan mentioned earlier, right? It's about VIP. You see, it's very critical. This entire theme of today and the next few days of conference is very, very apt in VUCA, coming together. Ladies and gentlemen, leading in VUCA environment is very, very important, especially leadership through influence, right? And when you're talking about leadership through influence, essentially it means communicating your vision and your values. When you communicate your vision and your values, you gain what? You gain trust. When you gain trust, you garner support. And when you garner support, what happens? You don't need titles and positions to move people. That's very, very important. And that's what VIP is all about. You come here, you come together. When you're communicating, you're talking about what's the next thing that we're going to do. What's the mission? What's the collective collaboration that we can take? What's the next step? That's all vision and values that you're communicating to each other. Subconsciously, of course, you don't know you're doing this, but essentially that's what you're doing. You're communicating vision and values. Once you communicate vision and values, you create trust among yourselves. When you create that trust among yourself, that's why you're able to come up here and cheer for your team, right? Because you got the support. That's very, very important, right? So a round of applause for everyone here for practicing that already. Now the key part is, of course, that's a very key part to this. Why? Because once you master this ability to lead by influence and ability to influence without title and position, once you master that, the second one becomes easier, which is leading remotely. Ladies and gentlemen, leading remotely is a skill set that we all need to learn, correct? In the last 3 years, how many physical meetings did you have in Toastmasters? Right? We don't. So what did the top leaders of Toastmasters do? They were leading remotely, correct? They were leading remotely. It wasn't an option. It was a necessity, ladies and gentlemen. And VUCA is going to be, with the interconnected systems around the world, you're going to find that it is going to be a necessity for you to master this skill, leading remotely. Now, leading remotely has actually a lot of influence due to the globalized talents, right? We have talents. I have a friend whose PA, he's here in KL, his PA is a talent in Philippines. Globalized talent, right? You can get PAs from around the world because they're essentially working from home nowadays. And they're working remotely. They can do that. Right? So you can essentially, that's a different argument in terms of economics of globalized talents and whatnot, but to say that there are opportunities in terms of globalized talent. And then you have the market economy that is very, very connected, right? You can invest from here into the NASDAQ. You can invest from here into the US stock market, right? So that's interconnected as well. Now that's driving remote leadership as well, because you're going to be connected with your miser there. Then, of course, you have ecosystems of connections across the world. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's a few tips that I would like to give in terms of leading remotely. The first thing is that you should feel at ease directing remotely and establishing confidence. Now, how do you establish confidence? Goes back to the earlier point, which is leading through influence. You cannot lead through your position. I am the MD, you do as I tell you to do. That's going to be very difficult when it comes to remote leadership. But if you are able to influence them, ladies and gentlemen, I'll give you a personal experience of leading remotely. I had to learn this as well, right? I had to learn this from books, asking my mentors as well, asking my coaches, right? When I did achieve, I think I did achieve the epitome of leading remotely, because during this last 3 years, I was able to shape the team to a certain extent that we do not have working hours anymore. And I would actually receive reports without me asking right? Without me asking, I can receive reports at 4 a.m. in the morning. And people will essentially take their own initiative. And the most important thing is that they feel that they have the entire freedom and control over their lives. This is very important, isn't it? Right? So, the second thing that we need to look at is establishing softer hierarchies. Meaning that you should be always approachable. Right? There's not too many blocks in between. Right? The third one is to empower teams. When you empower teams, they will work for you around the clock. They will adjust. If they have to go to market in between while they're working remotely, they will do so. But because you've empowered them, they'll make sure that the work gets done before the deadline. Right? That's very key as well. Now the fourth is establishing a sense of trust and confidence. And this goes back to leadership by influence. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the fifth point, adapting to complexity. Now this is quite different from using technology. Using technology is essentially us learning how to use the softwares and whatever's out there. Now adapting to complexity essentially means that you are going to be a partner with the technology. You've always had partners that are human beings, right? Have you ever had a partner that's a non-human? Today we do. You've got AI, artificial intelligence. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a secret that I have, right? My entire social media presence, right? How many social medias do you all have? You must have at least 5, right? You have your website, you have your YouTube channel, you have your Facebook, you have your LinkedIn, you have your Instagram. You must have at least 5, correct? If you're running a business, correct? At least 5. Right? Then if you're a little bit more progressive, you got your TikTok, and then you've got your WhatsApp as your business marketing social media app, right? And you've got all the other stuff as well, right? So you're going the entire length. Now, managing 5 social media, isn't it kind of tedious? Tedious, you got to create content. I'm going to give you a secret today. I essentially use an AI that helps me to create content, adjust the content to match my particular niche, post it, schedules it for the next 30 days. AI does that for me. And I'm here talking to you while that's doing it. That AI has become my partner. This is called automation, right? So adapting to complexity means you need to find ways to automate what you can using AI, right? Whatever things that are mundane, you need to figure out how to automate things. And this has to be in every leader's mind in this VUCA environment, because there's just too many information. And when you want to filter through what is reality, what is not, when you want to filter through all this complexity, you need to be able to automate some of the mundane things. You agree? You agree? Yeah. So figure out how to do that. I do that, and it's absolutely possible. Now, the other thing is, there are a lot of information and disinformation out there, correct? I mentioned earlier, right, that one of the things about uncertainty is the inability for us, the lack of predictability, or the lack of information. Essentially, it's not the lack of information, there's the abundance of misinformation and disinformation. Do you agree? There's so many information out there, right? There's so much of information, you got to filter through that. Now, in order for you to make your decision more effective, you have to partner with another AI, which we call machine intelligence. Now, when I talk about machine intelligence, everybody's thinking like, I'm like a micro enterprise, I'm not going to be able to afford an AI that can do machine intelligence for me, right? You're all thinking in that terms. Most of these AIs are free on the web, on the internet. Go look for them. It's there. Machine intelligence is already free and available for many of us. It's just either a paid subscription if you want to pay for it, right? If you want to render a video for your presentations, perhaps, you just input the script into a website, and it will create the video for you. Do you know that websites exist? That's AI. That's machine intelligence that's helping you. So the leaders of today, that's just one example, right? And there's many examples. So the leaders of today, essentially, the point of this entire message is that leaders of today must have an array of technology at their disposal that help, number one, helps to automate their mundane things. Use AI. Number two, helps them to make decisions. And there are AIs capable of that, right? Now, I'll give you an example of, well, we don't really necessarily require an AI, but the fact that we know the importance of data should drive us towards machine intelligence. I'll give you an example, right? I'll give you an example. There was this coachee. This is a very basic example of what data really means, right? So I had this coachee, and he sells nasi lemak. A coachee who sells nasi lemak at the junction of Kuala Lumpur. Very small nasi lemak owner, right? So for some odd reason, he says, I'll pay you for this, right? I'll pay you. I want to grow my business, right? So I said, okay, right? So he updates me every day of his business, right? So I asked him a simple question, who are your customers? And he says, people around Kuala Lumpur, that junction, right? So I asked him, the next question was, well, what is their age group? Yeah, 20, 30, 40. Where do they work? Right? Around this area of manufacturing. So I told him, why not for the next 1 week, you think about what really attracts these three groups. People around Kuala Lumpur, 20 to 30 years old, and perhaps working in the nearby factories. I told him that. So he went back, thought for about a week, and he came back. Oh, the second week he didn't come back, right? I was kind of curious as well, but I didn't say anything at all, right? So the second week he came back after 2 weeks, right? And he called me, and he was quite excited and said, Coach, you know what happened? What? I thought about it, and I found that the youngsters in Kuala Lumpur likes takoyaki, right? So I said, Kuala Lumpur is KL, Kuala Lumpur is also KL, so let's do takoyaki. So the last 10 days I've been selling takoyaki, and my revenue increased 3 times because they love takoyaki, and takoyaki is not available in Kuala Lumpur. Simple how data influenced the micro enterprise. Just knowing what the data was, right? He was super excited. By the way, I do not like takoyaki. Anybody here fan of takoyaki? I don't know. Oh yeah, there you go. You have a fan of takoyaki. I don't like takoyaki, by the way. Nobody here knows what takoyaki is it? Everybody knows what takoyaki is. Good. Oh yeah, vegetarian. I'm sorry about that, right? But it's okay. We both of us don't like takoyaki, right? All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, data is very important, and we as leaders in this VUCA environment need to figure out how to manage this data. From the simplest, like the nasi lemak seller, to the highest end, massive data, like what AirAsia has, right? Now that's one. Now the final part of leading in the VUCA environment is agility. Agility is the key to success in the VUCA environment. And what do I mean by agility? People say the only thing that is constant is change. People say that, right? Now, in this VUCA environment, the only thing that is constant is changing swiftly. That's very key. That's just one word that I added in, right? It's no more about changing. People change, right? But if you take 20 years to change, I'm sorry, brother, you're left behind, right? It's not changing 20 years. It doesn't talk. VUCA environment does not wait for you. So the key part to this is the ability to adapt and understand the situation and change swiftly. So if you're thinking that your personality is going to be the same every day in terms of leadership, it's not. It's going to be changing and adapting, and you must be open to that. If you're not open to changing swiftly, that I need to let go. the problem with changing is essentially because it worked in the past what? Correct? Isn't it? Right? That's one of the biggest challenges, isn't it? Right? It worked in the past what? Why not? Why not? Right? Let's just continue doing that. And the other thing is, of course, look, I'm the boss, I'm always right. That's one of the other things of problematic in terms of changing swiftly. Right? So this is one of the key things that you need to understand. In your organization, when you understand the fact that you need to change swiftly, then you know the things that you need to do in terms of changing the culture of operation within your organization. You probably need to get rid of some of those SOPs and bureaucracies, right, in order for you to change swiftly, right? And the second thing, of course, you may need to get rid of some of your ego as well. The 18-year-old, the 19-year-old who knows social media better comes and tells you something, and you say, I don't know, let me think about it. 3 years later, you come back to him, right? So that's not going to work as well, right? So you need to figure out how to reduce that ego a little bit more and able to accept suggestions and change according to the times. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you got to use the machine intelligence, you got to use the automation that you have, coupled with your physical sales team, your physical technical team, your physical team that you have. You couple that, and then you imbibe a culture of ability to change swiftly. Things in the environment change, you adjust and change along. Now let me just give you this one particular statement for you to take back home, right? The future of leadership is determined how fast leaders are able to adapt to change. Right? How fast you are able to adapt to change. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, here we go, the conclusion, right? As I mentioned earlier, right, in terms of agility, in terms of influence-based leadership, all that needs to be learned. And that's why I mentioned that in terms of training and development, the training of leaders has never been more important than today. That is a skill set that we need to learn, especially in the area, in this world where we are distanced through technology, right? Last time when we wanted to discuss something, I still remember, because I grew up I started my career in an environment where there was no instantaneous communication. We had a pager. Anybody had, I was an engineer. I started my career as an engineer, right? Anybody here were engineers? Anybody here started their career with engineers? Remember the time when you actually had a pager? Yeah, you got like your cell phone here, and then you got your pager here, and if you have 2 rows, you get 2 pagers, right? So one from this department, the other one from that department, and you're walking around with all this gadget on yourself, on your belt, right? And you got to make sure that your pants fit really well and tight, right? Otherwise, it's going to drop at the weight of the gadgets you have on your belt, right? So you got to be focused on that, right? Those were the days that I was born in. So during that time, instantaneous communication was very rare. So when we wanted to discuss something, what did you do? You actually had to stand up, you got to walk over to the other guy's cubicle, and you actually had a discussion, right? Right? That's how it was 20 years ago. But what do you do today? The guy is next to you on the next queue, and you're messaging him, bro, you want to go for lunch? He's in the next room, right? And the funniest thing is that a couple of weeks ago, right, I was in my room, right? My room is quite big. And my PA, right? My PA was on the next room, and she messaged me, boss, what do you want to have lunch for today? I'm in my room, and the door's open. That's the generation today, right? She's young, she's 25, right? She messages me, what do you want to have for lunch today? So that happens as well, ladies and gentlemen. So the thing is, there's a few things that we need to understand in leading in the 21st century. Now, this is the conclusion. Number 1, the VUCA environment, as much as volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, but it also creates a lot of risk, right? So, leaders in the VUCA environment will necessitate to take higher risks. You will have to, because the volatility is there. One day, Donald Trump tweets, everything goes up. Do you still remember anybody who invested in NASDAQ, in the US share stock exchange, right? One tweet from Donald Trump, the prices go up. The next trip, prices go down. That's volatility, right? So, the first thing is that there will be higher risks, and you will need to take higher risks. But higher risk means what? Higher returns. More money. Right? More money. And that's why Grab became $1 billion very quickly. Uber became... That's not something that you should be surprised. It was always the concept like that. Higher risk, higher return. They took the risk in a volatile environment. They made their billions. Same as Elon Musk. He's super rich. Why? Because he took the risk when nobody believed him, right? He wanted to put people in Mars. He still wants to put people in Mars. He's taking a risk where nobody wants to take risk. And when the risk is super high, the returns are super high as well. Right? So that's number one. Number two, failures in the VUCA world. Some of us will fail in terms of entrepreneurship, right? That's life, right? I've failed, everybody's failed. Elon Musk to a certain extent have failed. Everybody has failed. But the difference in this VUCA environment is that failures can be documented, measured, and gauged. Not like last time. No documents, nothing in the past, right? So difficult for us to measure. Today, we'll have a set of documents that showed us how we failed. And use that to learn, gain experience, and move on to the next project. That's very key. Number three, as I mentioned, and this is very important, right? As I mentioned earlier, in terms of training and development for leadership, there's a few things that the leaders in the 21st century is going to absolutely need. Number one, they need to be able to anticipate change using automation, machine intelligence, everything that I mentioned earlier. Number two, they need to be able to model situations. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if this happens? They need to be able to model and visualize these different types of situations. Leaderships have to do that, right? And this is called scenario planning, essentially. And number three, they need to build flexible and adaptable response, not only from themselves, but for the organization itself. Remember when COVID-19 happened, most of the training industry was like, what do we do now? We were never ready with the Zoom classes, we were never ready with the webinars, we were never ready with that. We were forced upon us, and we learned, we adapted, even though it took some time, right? Similarly, in this VUCA environment, we need to learn that. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a little bit on leading in the VUCA environment. I would like to essentially thank everyone here for listening to me for the last 45, 50 minutes. It's a great experience today. Thank you very much for listening to me. And I would like to extend my sincerest appreciation to Mr. Srinivas as well as Mr. Kishan and JP for organizing and allowing me to talk this morning here. You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you very much. And I will field any questions if you have. Thank you.